Throughout history, members of the Mafia were thought of as honorable criminals with their own codes and rules to follow. But like society as a whole, there were also mobsters who acted without rules or codes. These men were both sadistic and violent. They are the monsters of the Mafia.
Number 9. Anthony Gaspipe Casso. Anthony Salvatore Casso was born on May 21, 1942 at the Park Slope Methodist Hospital to Michael Casso and Marguerite Cucciello Casso. Young Anthony and his two older siblings, Michael Jr. and Lucille, were raised in the tough, working-class area of South Brooklyn. Both Casso's parents were first-generation Americans and retained many of the ideas and customs of the old country. Anthony Casso was raised on Union Street near Brooklyn's waterfront, a place where the Mafia was deeply entrenched within the community. It wasn't long before he was committing petty crimes and looking up to the men of respect in his area. One man in particular became a huge influence on young Anthony, and that man's name was Salvatore Calambrano. The same Salvatore Calambrano who just happened to be a capo in the Genovese crime family. Calambrano and Michael Casso grew up together as close friends, so it was a matter of course that Calambrano would become the godfather to Michael's youngest child, Anthony. His father had a record for burglaries in the 1940s, however, through the influence of his close friend Sally Calambrano, he got a job on the docks as a longshoreman. For the most part, Anthony Casso had a solid middle-class upbringing. He would even take hunting trips with his father to upstate New York, where together they would hunt deer on the farm of Charlie LaRocca. LaRocca was another close friend of his father's, who along with Sally Calambrano was also affiliated with the Mafia. Casso and his father both had a love for hunting and would often have plenty of game to bring home for Anthony's mother to prepare for dinner. As he got into his teenage years, Casso would practice by shooting birds from rooftops of Brooklyn tenements using a .22 caliber rifle he rigged with a makeshift silencer. He would also make money shooting predatory hawks for pigeon keepers. In 1954, Casso would see a man murdered for the first time. He would witness the deaths of both Joe Monosco and Donald Marino, which were deeply traumatic for the boy who was not yet in his teens. From this, he would learn how dangerous a life hustling on the streets could be. He would also join a gang called the South Brooklyn Boys, and together with fellow gang members, he would get into fights and commit petty crimes. In 1958, he was arrested after a gang brawl against a rival Irish-American gang. Casso later said that his father visited him at the police station and tried in vain to scare his son straight. Though his father urged his son to stay out of trouble, young Anthony was determined to live a life of crime. He couldn't help but be impressed by the men like his godfather, who walked around in flashy suits with pockets full of money. Seeing the flashy lifestyle his godfather lived, Anthony Casso decided from an early age that he wanted to be a mobster. At 16, he would drop out of school and take a job as a longshoreman, though it is alleged by some historians to have been a no-show job. During this time, he would take his father's nickname Gaspipe. It is alleged that his father got the nickname because he liked to use a gas pipe as a weapon. Casso's dark side began to reveal itself when one day on the piers, a dock worker began bragging about his new boots. Listening to this, Casso decided to drop 500 pounds of cargo on the man's feet to test these new boots. The man ended up breaking most of his toes under the weight, which Casso found to be extremely funny. This gave everyone around him a glimpse at his twisted sense of humor. Casso would begin to cement his reputation as a man to be feared in the spring of 1961. While driving, Casso noticed a woman being harassed by a man who at a glance looked like one of the many junkies in the neighborhood. The man's name was Bobby Bebop. And after watching him harass the young lady, Casso stopped his car and confronted Bebop. An argument ensued, during which Casso pulled out his .32 caliber pistol and emptied it into the would-be assailant. Casso immediately went to see his godfather, Sally Calambrano. Together with Casso's father, the two got young Anthony out of town until the heat died down. It wasn't long before the police were on the lookout for Anthony Casso. Casso was eventually arrested and charged. Eventually, however, deals were made, money exchanged hands, and Bebop refused to identify Casso as his attacker. The case was then dismissed, and Anthony Casso learned a valuable lesson. He learned that justice, like any other commodity, could be bought and sold. As Casso aged into his 20s, he would get noticed by an up-and-coming mobster in the Lucchese crime family by the name of Christopher "Christy Tick" Funari. As a capo, Funari ran his crew out of a social club known as the 19th Hole. Under Funari, Casso would return to the docks working as a loan shark, bookmaker, and enforcer. He would also become an excellent thief and hijacker. Funari also used Casso as muscle for his gambling and drug-dealing rackets. It was around this time he would receive his first conviction for bookmaking, which resulted in a 5-day jail sentence, along with a $50 fine. It was also at the 19th Hole Casso would meet his future partner, Vicamuso. The two would become close, and together they would climb the ladders of power within the Lucchese crime family. Casso would begin to make connections in both the underworld as well as his personal life. During these early years as a burglar and hijacker, Casso would meet future mob heavyweights such as Salvatore Gravano, Carmine Persico, Anthony Spiro, and Frank DeCicco. He would also meet Lillian Del Duca. Del Duca and Casso would date throughout the mid-60s and would eventually marry on May 4, 1968. It is alleged in the book Gaspipe by Philip Carlo that the couple would often travel to the Persico farm in upstate New York and spend the weekend with the powerful Colombo capo, Carmine Persico. Enjoying his time on the Persico farm, along with the memories of his upstate hunting trips, influenced Casso to buy a farm just north of the Catskills in Roxbury in the fall of 1970. He would give this property to his outdoor-loving father, fulfilling a childhood dream of building a country house for his parents, where his father could hunt and fish during his elderly years. This childhood dream would not last long. On December 15, 1970, Anthony's father, Michael Casso, died from complications relating to a heart attack. Despite the turmoil in Casso's personal life, his life in the mob would go on under Lucchese capo Christopher "Christy Tick" Funari. With other members of the 19th Hole crew, Casso formed a burglary ring named the Bypass Gang. Made up of both top-notch entrymen and enforcers, the Bypass Gang were known for being able to bypass any alarm and crack any safe. This group of expert thieves were Lucchese family associates John Otto Heidel, George Zappola, Junior McGuire, Frankie Melli, and Dominique Costa. Casso would also partner with future Gambino heavyweight Frank DeCicco on many of these scores. Some estimates say that the gang stole upwards of $100 million by the late 1980s. Casso would also enter the marijuana business in 1971. It is alleged that over time, he would later get involved in the cocaine and heroin trade. Between his income from the Bypass Gang and his income from the narcotics business, Anthony Casso was becoming a wealthy man. Also during this time, Casso would meet another gangster of Jewish descent who would make a huge impact on Casso's life in the underworld. This man's name was Burton Kaplan, and he was as tough as he was smart. Later on, after Casso would become a made man, Kaplan would be Casso's man in the narcotics business. In the future, these two would partner up in various other rackets and ventures. In the early 1970s, Funari would give Casso his first contract from his Lucchese family bosses. Lee Scheffler, a drug dealer and associate of the Lucchese family, was thought to be cooperating with law enforcement. Using an intermediary to set Scheffler up, Casso would complete his first contract by putting a bullet to the back of the man's head. Casso had already shown that he was tough, had street smarts, and could earn. Now he proved to his superiors that he could kill and that he could keep his mouth shut about it. With a circle of up-and-coming mobsters around him and a reputation on the rise, the sky was the limit for Anthony Casso.